In most missing people cases, the last photo ever taken of a person before they vanished without a trace is an unnerving and creepy image in retrospect, even if what they were doing looked normal in the photo at the time that it was caught on camera. For that reason alone, these scary pictures have horrifying backstories that simply shouldn't exist. Shalissa Pratt mysteriously disappeared under extremely strange circumstances when the 34-year-old was last caught on camera leaving her Hollywood apartment on August 22, 2022. According to her husband, Keith, Shalissa had grown away from him. On the afternoon that she became a missing person, she allegedly had a breakdown and left their Hollywood apartment. Keith caught up with her at the Greyhound bus station in downtown Los Angeles, where she planned to visit family in Atlanta, as she had done a month before. The last time she went to Atlanta, she sent her family a photo of her bus ticket so they would know that she was coming, and then turn her phone off so Keith wouldn't be able to track her movements, as he was known to sometimes remotely ping the cell phone towers and find out where she had gone missing. She changed her mind and returned to LA. This time, there was no contact between Shalissa and her family, and no photo was sent of a bus ticket to Atlanta. The first time her mother learned about the trip was when Keith called her later that day to tell her what had happened. She went to the bus station to wait for Shalissa, but the missing person never arrived. Meanwhile, Keith tracked her cell phone and found out her final destination was in San Bernardino, for reasons unknown. Shalissa's strange disappearance is another missing person case with far more questions than answers. Investigators found it strange how Shalissa had turned off the phone one time but not the other. They also cannot explain why she went missing from the bus, and they're uncertain if she was making a brief stop and intended to return. After Shalissa was reported as a missing person, detectives learned of a recent crime story at San Bernardino in a bus station. Someone matching Shalissa's appearance had been kicked out of the station for trying to steal a suitcase. Caught on camera was CCTV footage of this event, but the unnerving images have not been released. Anyone with information on this unsolved missing person case should contact the Los Angeles Police Department at 213-996-1800. Joseph Driscoll's strange disappearance occurred on Remembrance Day in 2022 in British Columbia. As part of the investigation into this missing person case, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police shared a creepy last photo of Joseph caught on camera before he mysteriously disappeared. Joseph was an electrician working in northern British Columbia. He had traveled to see a tragically hip tribute band the night before his inexplicable vanishing. The final photo was taken from a security camera near the door of a motel in the Valley View area. The backstory behind the strange photo is creepy because Joseph wasn't staying at the motel and wasn't inside for very long before leaving, never to be found again. On November 11th, he was stopped by police while driving a black truck. There was another person in the truck with him. Why he was stopped and who he was with hasn't been revealed, but the truck was impounded. Nobody was arrested for a crime. At some point during the day, Joseph was in touch with his sister, Emma. She didn't notice anything out of the ordinary about the conversation and had no reason to believe it would be the last time she spoke to him before he vanished without a trace. At about 11:50 p.m., Joseph left the Tournament Inn motel where he was staying. The weather was freezing, but Joseph had been outside all day, only wearing a hooded sweatshirt, long john-style pants, and ankle boots. He was caught on CCTV 40 minutes later at the second motel. It was this final photo that police shared with the media. They stated he looked significantly different to the old photos that had been shared prior. The final sighting of Joseph was walking along the 1700 block of the East Trans-Canada Highway, 15 minutes after the creepy photo was taken. The investigation into the mysterious disappearance of Joseph began a few days later. It was extremely out of character for him to go without contacting his family for so long, and investigators learned he hadn't caught his flight home. Joseph's sister later shared that he was recovering from addiction. Joseph was also an extremely outgoing person before he went missing. His family feared he might have relapsed from isolation after the worldwide lockdowns. There's a $10,000 reward for information in this case. Anyone with information can contact Kamloops Police at 250-828-3000. Larice Hawkins was 24 when she mysteriously disappeared. The aspiring actress lived in Los Angeles and was cast in a performance on a Norwegian cruise ship called The Escape. The final photo was posted on Instagram on May 6, 2018. It showed Larice outside of a restaurant with her friend Juan. May 28th was the day of Larice's strange disappearance. On that fateful day, she made dozens of social media posts to Facebook, posting multiple times in a minute, which was strange for her. Most of the posts were short, random thoughts about films, lines from songs, and feeling lonely. A few friends reached out in the comments, but none seemed to engage Larice in conversation, and then the social media posts suddenly stopped, which is a creepy backstory given the context of what happened next. Larice disappeared 80 nautical miles off the coast of New Jersey. There was no sign of her aboard the ship, and no security footage of the events leading to her absence. Most believe Larice fell overboard and became lost at sea, as there's little other explanation and no signs of foul play. Larice is sadly considered to have passed away, but she is still listed as an unsolved missing person case, more than 4 years later. The last known image of Levi Davis, a famous rugby player who appeared on The X Factor, shows him walking away from a bar in Barcelona. He was wearing a backpack, had little money in his pocket, and no passport. October 29th was the last day Levi was caught on camera before he went missing. The 24-year-old was visiting a friend on the island of Ibiza when he posted a video to social media about being blackmailed and fearing for his life. Levi also said that he needed to return home. Before his friend could find out what was going on, Levi was on a ferry back to mainland Spain. On the ferry, he deleted the cryptic social media post and sent a video to his mother, calmly talking about how beautiful the view was. But Levi left all of his belongings behind, including his bank cards and passport, and did not return. He had some cash, but it would have been almost impossible for him to get a hotel room without an ID. Levi was next seen on CCTV at the Old Irish pub in Barcelona city center. It was as he left the pub that the last photo of Levi was taken. The creepy image showed him walking away and into the unknown. When Levi was reported missing is unclear, but social media appeals for information were made a few days later. There have been a few unconfirmed sightings of Levi near the pub where he was last seen before he vanished into thin air. His phone last pinged near the train station, suggesting he might have left the area. There's a $10,000 reward for information in this case. Any information can be sent to a dedicated email address at findlevidavis@gmail.com. On May 9th of 2020, Suzanne Morphew sent a final photo to a man she was having an affair with. It was a simple bikini photo, but one that would have a creepy backstory. The next day, she was reported as a missing person, and her unsolved mystery began. Suzanne was a married mother of 2 living in Colorado with her husband Barry. Both of them were seeing other people. Before she went missing, she told Barry she wanted a divorce, but Barry apparently wanted to try to salvage the relationship. She and Barry were getting food at a neighboring town. According to Barry, she was still asleep when he left the house on May 10th to go to Broomfield, where he had a construction job. His daughters were on a camping trip and had sent a text wishing their mother a happy Mother's Day. When she didn't respond, they asked Barry if everything was all right. Barry asked a neighbor to check in on his wife. The neighbor found both Suzanne and her bike missing and reported it to authorities. Suzanne's bike was later found the same day on the side of a cliff near the family home. However, there was no sign of Suzanne nearby. Searches of the area have turned up nothing, and police suspect she may not have gone for a bike ride at all. Barry became the prime suspect. Part of his story didn't add up, and investigators discovered he'd made multiple stops to dump trash on his way to the construction job. They also discovered creepy text messages from Suzanne before she went missing, telling her sister how Barry had become physical with her. Barry denied this and claimed it was in self-defense. He has made multiple appeals for whoever was responsible for this crime to bring Suzanne home. Barry was arrested and charged with taking his life's wife, but the charges were dropped a few months later. DNA from an unknown male was found in Suzanne's car, on her bike and helmet. It was a partial match to a man convicted of crimes elsewhere in the country. Police do not believe Suzanne is still alive, but are appealing for information that'll solve this strange missing person case. At first, someone looking at this photo of the Church of San Juan Parangarin Cutrillo might wonder why people decided to create a building in such an isolated area. But this church was actually in the middle of a village, which now lies beneath the surface. Up until 1943, there was nothing unusual about the village. But in February of that year, villagers began to feel a rumbling, and allegedly a deep chasm appeared in the ground. By this point, villagers and another nearby village began to evacuate. 9 days after the rumbling began, what would become Paracutin began to erupt. This was a completely new volcano and actually emerged in the middle of a cornfield. This type of volcano doesn't typically have a volatile eruption, but for the next 10 years, it slowly spread lava around the surrounding areas. The villagers had plenty of time to evacuate, and they would occasionally come back to look at the slowly spreading lava. It took a year for the volcano to melt the stone wall that surrounded the church graveyard, but it eventually found its way in. The lava slowly spread over the graves and reached the church walls. Over the years, the lava piled high enough that it eventually covered almost the entire village. The only thing that remained was the very top of the church. Remarkably, the altar remained intact. Today, the old church is something of a tourist spot, and many make a pilgrimage to the site. It's strange to imagine an entire town lying beneath your feet as you walk to the structure. Nobody had their life taken during this eruption, and the villagers created a new settlement nearby. The families of those who escaped the eruption tell stories about how the elders believed that the end of the world had come. There's always something a little unsettling about underwater photographs, especially when the thing being photographed doesn't belong at the bottom of the seafloor. But while there are plenty of ships that have come to rest at the bottom of the ocean, finding 2 fully intact trains resting on the seafloor was a surprise. The 2 locomotives were first discovered in 1985. They rested about 5 miles off the coast of Long Branch, New Jersey, and were covered in decades worth of rust and barnacles. The original discovery was made by Paul Hepler, who was mapping the ocean floor when he came across something unusual. At first, he couldn't make out what it was, but later dives revealed the 2 trains. The trains rested upright, facing in the same direction. Paul described them as almost looking as if they were racing across the sea floor. Photos of the trains showed that sea creatures had now made them into homes, but also allowed train experts to reveal what they were. The trains are extremely rare Planet Class 222T models that experts believe were manufactured by Seth Wilmarth Union Works sometime between 1848 and 1855. The reason why these trains were so rare is because they were not very useful. The steam engines were 15 tons, which couldn't compete with the 35-ton engines that were being produced at the time. How and why these 2 locomotives ended up at the bottom of the ocean remains a mystery. Historians have found no record of the trains being lost or even being created in the first place. A possible explanation came in 2016 when researchers were looking into Seth Wilmarth and uncovered an order from the New York and Erie Railroad made in 1854. The railroad company couldn't pay in cash though, and at a time of economic uncertainty, it seems unlikely the company would have accepted the notes that were offered as payment. Historians believed the locomotives were being transported from Boston to New York by ship when they went overboard. A likely scenario is that the ship hit a storm and the trains were pushed overboard to stop the whole ship from sinking. No record of this has ever been found though. and the subjects of these creepy photos remain mysterious. This creepy-looking photo looks something like a still from a low-budget sci-fi program. In actuality, the man in the mask is the person many people believe triggered the start of the Cold War. Igor Gouzenko was born in 1919 in Russia. He was academically gifted at a young age and trained as a cipher clerk. When the Soviet Union joined the Second World War, his skills were in high demand. He earned a position working in Canada and brought his pregnant wife along with him. Life in Canada was good for Igor and his family, much better than they would have had it in the Soviet Union. When the war ended, Igor's work didn't. The Soviet Union had been spying on Western allies during the war, and that was still continuing. But when Igor received a message saying he was being brought back to Russia, he began to worry. He feared he had done something wrong and would face severe punishment back home. Even if that wasn't the case, he didn't want to return to the relatively difficult life faced by the people living in the Soviet Union. So he did what he felt he needed to do. Over the course of several weeks, he moved hundreds of papers from his office back to his apartment. On the night of his final day in the office, he went to the local newspaper and tried to reveal the Soviet spy ring that was in operation in Canada. The reporters there didn't believe him and told him to go to the RCMP. Igor had been reluctant to go there, fearing Soviet spies had already infiltrated the police force. But by that point, he didn't feel like he had a choice. The RCMP didn't believe him at first, but when Soviet officers raided Igor's home, they realized he was telling the truth. Luckily, Igor and his wife had thought ahead and were staying with a neighbor when the raid occurred. Igor handed over his files and revealed the extent of the Soviet espionage in Canada and the US. The Gouzenkos were given new identities and lived the rest of their lives in Canada. Igor eventually had 8 children and managed to keep his true identity a secret, even to his youngest children. He spent the rest of his life extremely paranoid, knowing that the Soviet government wanted to take him out. Still, he conducted a number of interviews but did so while wearing this creepy-looking mask or hood, with only his eyes and mouth visible, in an effort to keep his identity a secret. These photos, taken by students at the VNR Institute of Engineering and Technology, look like countless taken by university students around the world. The group was having fun on a trip, cooling off in a river during a rest stop. Moments later, that same water would wash 24 of the students away. The terrible backstory behind these photos has become known as the Bias River disaster. The photos were taken on June 8, 2014. The students were mostly engineering students from college, enjoying a well-earned outing after their exams. The trip had gotten off to a bad start, with the bus driver demanding payment up front, and then a flat tire leading to a delay of an hour. The group decided to drive through lunch to try to make it to a planned water rafting activity, but they would never make it. At about 4 p.m., they stopped for lunch, then continued on for a little way. Shortly before 6:30 p.m., the bus stopped again so someone could use the restroom. The location was near a trail that led to the River Bias. The students and some of the staff supervising the trip went down to the riverbank. The water was very shallow at this point, only about an ankle deep, and the students waded in to take these photos. It was extremely warm, even at that point in the evening, and the water was refreshing. At around 6:30 p.m., 2 men on the bank began shouting and pointing upstream. They'd been collecting sand, but now suddenly were in distress. Not far upstream was a dam, and it had suddenly released water without warning. In a matter of minutes, the water in the river rose and washed away many of the students. Some were lucky enough to be close enough to the banks to be pulled out. One student saved 5 of his fellow students before he was washed away himself. A total of 24 students and 1 of the tour guides were washed away. The dam workers insisted that they had played warning sirens, but nobody in the neighboring villages had heard them. The dam was ultimately deemed to be at fault, and the families of the victims received compensation, but that couldn't make up for the devastation. Seawater damage gives this photo a strange effect, but it would otherwise seem relatively normal. A man in a life vest seems to be relaxing at night. It's actually one of the last photos taken during the sinking of the MS Estonia, one of the worst maritime disasters in European history. taking place only a few short decades ago, the sinking of the MS Estonia cost more than 800 lives. Stories of survivors from the sinking resembled stories from the Titanic. Couples decided to stay together rather than separate, and only one survived. Freezing temperatures cost many people their lives. The main difference to the sinking of the Titanic, though, was just how quickly it took place. The Estonia was a cruise ferry set for a route between Stockholm and Estonia. It could transport 2,000 people and had a car deck with an openable bow that allowed vehicles to be driven in and out while at port. The Estonia serviced the route for about a year before disaster struck in the early hours of September 28, 1994. The night before, at about 7:15 p.m., the ship had left port like normal. There were 989 people aboard, including the mostly Estonian crew. The majority of the passengers were from Sweden, and most did not know each other. There were a few groups aboard the ship and a number of couples, but most were strangers to one another. There was a storm in the Baltic Sea, and when the ship left coastal waters, it began to rock as waves hit it from head on. Many of the passengers became seasick, but entertainment continued in the bars and pubs. The ship traveled at full power, but was slowed by the force of the waves. At one point, the openable bow on the car deck became loose, and then fell away entirely. The ship began filling with water and tilting to the starboard side. In less than 15 minutes, the tilt was so steep that people who were still inside were unable to escape. Mikkel Un was one of those who did manage to escape. He'd been in his cabin when a loud bang was heard at approximately 1 a.m. Mikkel didn't know what the issue was, but he put his alarm clock and camera in his pocket and rushed out of the room. Seeing the chaos outside, he joined the scramble to get out of the ship and managed to get outside. As the ship continued to tilt, Mikkel climbed onto the outside of the hull and eventually onto the keel. Mikkel used the camera flash to try to get the attention of any rescuers, but there was nobody coming at that time. He ended up in the water, but managed to swim to one of the life rafts. It was partially inflated and there was water inside, but he managed to get in. He was one of the 10 people aboard the raft that managed to survive. When Mikkel developed the photos, seawater had badly damaged the film, but they were still visible. In 2 of the chilling photos, a man can be seen looking in Mikkel's direction. He was later identified as Jano Acer. Jano was one of the survivors and had seen Mikkel's light, but knew he was too far away to rescue him. Only 137 people survived the sinking, which lasted only an hour. A number of changes were introduced to try to stop this from ever happening again. The Book of Good Manners is a manuscript that was written by Jean-Duc de Berry, the younger brother of King Charles V of France. It provides text relating to moral behavior and ethical values. This illustration can be found within the copies of the guide and is also a topic of discussion among ufologists. The image of the goddess of luck, the personification of Fortuna. She's depicted with her spinning wheel and is accompanied by a large sphere that hovers randomly in the middle. The golden spherical object is said to be Fortuna's orb, identified by the characteristics of it being divided into 3 parts by intricate decoration, as a reference to the T and O map, which depicts the world as a circle of water. But according to ufologists, this orb is an alien spacecraft. History fans would know of the theory of the ancient astronauts that are depicted in cave paintings, ancient books, and even paintings. Such theorists have suggested the presence of ancient aliens in medieval art, and this manuscript was not an exception. This book had been created in 1388, which already disproved the theory that the sphere was a balloon, since no such device had been invented as of yet. Behind the floating orb, a fleet of unknown objects accompany it, with what appear to be rays of light pointing downward, consistent with the standard idea of UFOs. Additionally, one of the noblemen appears to be startled by the appearance of it. Others have suggested that the golden orb is a representation of the sun or the wheel of fortune. This was not the only illustration that was thought to depict the coming of aliens, though. To name a few others that have been under investigation by alien experts: the Miracle of Snow, the Madonna with Saint Giovannino, Triumph of Summer Tapestry, and the 1710 painting of the Baptism of Christ. 3 historical works, along with the Book of Good Manners, may be the depictions of early encounters with the third kind. While there have been a few theories and suggestions as to what the hovering ball might be, it appears that it's been figured out by the UFO experts of the world. It appears that alien visitations have been around since before medieval times, since many ancient civilizations had also drawn various pictures describing things they had seen. Who would have thought that the oldest image of a ghost would have been an engraving from 2,500 to 3,500 years ago? A Babylonian clay tablet was discovered and is believed to be the oldest image of a ghost. The spirit is that of an elderly male who's being guided back to the underworld by a female figure. The tablet was given to the British Museum on the 3rd of November in 1883 and was found to date back to the 4th century BC. The tablet is incomplete due to the damage it had sustained during excavation, but it's believed that its purpose seems clear as to what the ancient civilizations believed about spirits. The scribe of the artifact detailed the layout of a spell and ritual that apprentice exorcists may use to dispel the phantoms. The engraving shows a slender, bearded man with bound wrists. He's tied to a rope which is being held firmly by the guide, who leads him back to where he belongs. He's also said to be looking quite miserable. The image and its cuneiform inscription were deciphered by a senior curator at the British Museum's Middle East Department, Dr. Irving Finkel. He explained that the spirit was restless and was quite taken with women. To rid the family of the wandering spirit, an exorcist created a female partner whose job was to lead him away. Only the first couple of words of the entirety of the spell have survived. It can be translated from Babylonian to mean Shamash, Lord of the Broad. Shamash was the sun god of ancient Mesopotamia. As a divine judge, he would also directly associate with the underworld, which is likely why he would be summoned during such a ritual. According to the curator, the tablet is only part of a guide that was used in exorcisms, and one can only see the image if it's viewed from above and under a light. Aside from calling on Shamash, the exorcist also needs to make figurines of both a man and a woman. 2 vessels of beer need to be prepared, and at sunrise, the ritualistic words must be spoken. The idea is for the ghost to be turned into one of the figurines, with the last line being, "Not look behind you." The warning is thought to be aimed at the figurines that enter the underworld, but could also possibly be a warning for the exorcist who performs the ritual. It's thought that the drawing was carried out by a master craftsperson who was skilled in clay drawings. It's thought that the guide would be held in the exorcist's library or possibly their temple. Finkel explained that one probably won't give it a second thought when they first look at it, as it looks like there's no writing. But when placed under a lamp, the figures leap out, suddenly becoming quite plainly visible. It's small enough to fit in one's hand, but at least half of the original guide is missing. The curator had also written a book that focused on Mesopotamia after reading a history of ghosts which had started in the 18th century. In early civilizations, the people would expect to encounter spirits, and ancient chroniclers such as Pliny, Plautus, and Lucian, who would all reference phantoms in their writing. Some such observers would also leave instructions on how to get rid of certain types of spirits. Mesopotamians would rely upon funerary rituals to prevent those who passed on from rising again. Spirits would often be considered objects of sympathy, since they were being deprived of eternal rest. To appease the ghosts, a school of specialist magic would be required, which would send them back to the underworld and prevent them from causing any further trouble. In this culture, the souls would return and manifest as a sickness among the living. While they were viewed with sympathy, they simply could not stick around. Doctors would bring in exorcists to dispel them before continuing further treatment of those who'd fallen ill. The ancient tablet was rediscovered in the museum vault and had never been displayed previously. The white lines in the image are traces that had been done by James Fraser and Chris Cobb for Irving Finkel's The First Ghosts. Ghosts, hauntings, demons, and aliens are not entirely new concepts, it appears. Pictured here is the frightening Yuan, a creature of Japanese folklore that is a disembodied voice. The tales state that the creature will shout out its name, scaring anyone who hears it. They generally take up residence in empty temples or abandoned houses, and they live off of the fear that they cause. There's no written record of the creature's appearance, as it's heard and not often seen. Its name was derived from the sound it makes that it cries out from the darkness. The Yuan was only given its anthropomorphic shape in the Edo period by Sawaki Sushi, an artist who believed that there must be more to the creature than just ghostly noises. When these creatures are encountered, it's generally outside of old buildings or abandoned temples. They usually target lone passers-by, leaping from the shadows and shouting "Uwan." It relies solely on a surprise attack, and some victims may faint and never regain consciousness. This allows the cryptid to steal their essence and flee back into the dark corners. There is a deterrent, though. If the victim shouts "Uwan" back at the yokai, it'll flee and never bother them again. According to legend, there's a famous encounter that took place in the Edo period in the Akita prefecture. A couple had purchased an old mansion and moved in together. Upon their first night at the new place, they were woken up by a loud voice shouting "Uwan." They were shocked and searched the mansion for a possible source. It carried on for quite some time and erupted randomly throughout the night and the nights that followed. The newlyweds were unable to get any sleep during this time. A neighbor had asked them why they looked so tired, and the husband attempted to explain that there was a mysterious voice that kept shouting during the night. None of the neighbors had heard such a voice, and so no one believed them. Gossip quickly spread through the town, stating that they were not getting any sleep due to nocturnal activity, which caused them some embarrassment. This led them to never mention the shouting voice again, and were forced to endure these sleepless nights. The mystery surrounding the ghostly cries and the decision of the couple to suffer silently only add to the eerie atmosphere of the tale. The Yuan is said to have 3 claws on each hand, as illustrated by Sushi. It also has a mouth curled into a snarl, with teeth blackening, which was a regular practice for the early yokai. It's also pointed out that certain parts of Kumamoto and Kagoshima territory used wan or wanwan as a dialect, or as a general term that meant monster. It's uncertain if this dialect had anything to do with the naming of the Yuan. While it's often said that the yokai inhabit old buildings, the idea that they haunt houses comes from Toriyama Sekien's illustration, which showed the Uwan emitting from behind a willow tree and over a broken building. But no explanation had accompanied the illustration. An expert in Japanese folklore, Shigeru Mizuki, had mentioned in his yokai encyclopedias that reliable information on the bodiless voice is scarce, and there are very few earlier materials that can be found on the subject. Most of the stories depicting the Yuan have come from modern times. According to the 1980s Yokai Encyclopedia, written by Arifumi Sato, the Uwan are said to haunt graveyards as well, but no proper source of where this information had come from was ever given. The St. George's Church is found in the town of Lukova and has been deserted since the 1960s. The building was originally built in the mid-14th century, but did not have the best of luck. Throughout the years, it was subject to various accidents and strange events, which led people to believe that it was cursed, preventing anyone from going back there. Rumors that the church was haunted spread throughout the town as well, further adding to its closure in 1968. During its misfortune, the church would be reconstructed until the final one. It was that year that a funerary service was taking place when part of the roof had suddenly caved in at random. Thereafter, the community decided that enough was enough, and the church would be boarded up and never made use of again for service. For almost 50 years, the church would be left abandoned. That was until 2014, when a professor at the Department of Design and Fine Arts at the University of West Bohemia had asked his third-year bachelor students to find a suitable old church that could be used for an art installation. Each of them had to find their own church, some of which only found the foundation or a few walls. Jacob Hadrava knew exactly where to find an abandoned but still intact church. The church was just functional enough for the student to build his life-sized ghostly statues, as seen in the image. They're dressed in robes and seated in the pews. The figurative sculptures had been made from plaster, but with the help of a few models who would be needed to prepare a cast. One cast was made in the church and a copy of the bench was made. The rest of the statues would be made at the university. One singular statue would take half an hour to complete, and he made 32 of them, each of which is hollowed out. According to the artist, these installments represent the soldiers who lived in the area before the First World War, who were forced out of Czechoslovakia. For others, however, they were representations of the parishioners who'd loved and cared for the church. Hadrava's art had paid off, and word spread that the church was not permanently inhabited. Visitors from all over the country began to arrive to see the ghostly statues for themselves. Soon, many would travel all around Europe, and donations began to flood in. A fund was established to assist the local authorities and historians in resurrecting the old church and restoring it to its former glory. The statues certainly sent a shiver down one's spine, but it had brought the building back to life. For more than 8 years, the installation has brought locals and tourists, raising 23,500 euros, which allowed the roof to be repaired. This further offered an opportunity for concerts as well as masses to be held there. This Czech church had previously been marked by hauntings and misfortune, but now appears to be taking a step towards life. Exorcisms are not a recent thing, and some of the earliest forms of this date back to the Mesopotamian era. During the first millennium, purveyors of magic would expel demons that brought illness or pain with them. Elaborate rituals would be performed, and occasionally helper demons would be consulted. The following image is a bronze Mesopotamian booklet that's housed at the Louvre Museum in Paris. It's known as the Plaque of Lamashtu, a female demon lord and lover of Pazuzu. Lamashtu was responsible for being a great burden during childbirth, and so this plaque would be used to protect the women. The plaque, in essence, depicts an ancient exorcism that warded off the demon lord. It protected expecting mothers from nightmares, disease, and general unpleasantness. This bronze plate was called peso by the Mesopotamian civilization and belongs to the Babylonian period. It served as an amulet or a talisman, which could either have been artificial or natural. The talisman could be used in the form of a seal or a necklace and was known to have protective powers, warding off evil demons or attracting good fortune. Peso was mostly used among women and can be found in various forms, which included necklaces or statues or plates. In this case, the bronze amulet was hung in the entrances of houses for protection for expecting mothers, as it would reject the disease demon Lamashtu to the underworld. Peso was initially a demon god during the first millennium, who's said to have a dog-like face. He would protect the citizens against storms and damaging winds, as well as the expecting mothers. The plaque, which depicts both the disease bringer as well as the protector, is 133 millimeters high, and the main space is divided into 6 parts. In the highest section, there are the symbolic signs of the main Mesopotamian gods, where the writer requests their support, and another row shows 7 creatures that have animal heads, along with human figures who play the role of protectors. The middle row shows a patient lying on a bed with half human and half fish, tending to them from both sides. Beside them, 3 lords or 3 sub-guards are seen. In the last row of the plaque, Lamashtu can be seen as so represented with a lion's head. Alongside her is Peso, along with the boat that takes her to the underworld. The underworld is indicated by the presence of fish in the lower part of the plaque. The Hyosube is a Japanese yokai that's the relative of another known as Kappa, its cousin. Pictured here is a basic drawing of what one may expect to encounter in underwater caves, according to Japanese folklore. The child-sized river monster resides in Kyushu and prefers to come out of the waters during the evening. It's said that this creature loves to indulge in eggplants. According to legend, the Hyosube had originally been dolls that had been brought to life by a magician to build him a shrine that was used to summon a battle god of the same name. Once the shrine had been completed, they were thrown in the river. These creatures were found mostly in Saga and Miyazaki prefectures, in Kyushu, and are believed to have been named after Hyobu Taifu, the man who would have had to deal with the yokai that would become a threat to the people who resided near the Shomi Jinja temple. They take the appearance of small bipedal animals with hairy-bodied bald heads and are adorned with sharp teeth and claws. While they're known to inhabit the river waters, they do have the tendency to climb into the bathtubs of nearby households, after which they leave behind a stench and greasy hair. While they may not appear to be very threatening, these yokai should not be underestimated. Their personalities are filled with rage after being discarded and can be violent and unpredictable. It's also believed that they retain the power of the god that was summoned. They find pleasure in causing damage to property and do not back down from direct, straight-out assault. That being said, the living dolls are both physically and magically weaker than a kappa, and so they have to pick their fights accordingly. The Hyosube are of a stricter origin and choose to rather be debilitating and harsh. They have a hatred towards horses, which seems rather irrational. Their hair is said to be toxic toward horses, but anywhere that the creature travels, disease quickly follows. This disease-harboring ability is not the consequence of their living conditions, but is rather magical in nature. The illnesses are akin to a curse, as one story outlines. A woman had chased a hyosube away from her eggplant field and fell dangerously ill. She then turned purple before entirely withering away. Others have reported catching a lethal contagion, all of which regard the powers of the beast. Its weaknesses are less imposing than that of a kappa, and it can be tested in face-to-face combat. They lack the abilities of direct magic and can be quite easily distracted by eggplants. The hairy cryptid is much nastier than its cousin, hence why the man, Hyobo Taifu, had to fend them off from the inhabitants around the temple. The most haunted castle in Scotland is the 12th century Edinburgh Castle, which is subject to a lengthy history. It had been the site of various battles, as well as political upheaval. The souls of soldiers and prisoners are said to still haunt this building today. Many have reported feeling a presence and have seen apparitions throughout the castle. The site has been the home to people since the Iron Age and has played an important role in serving as a royal residence, a stronghold, and a prison. In 1566, the Queen of Scots had birthed her son, James VI, after which it would play a role in the wars of Scottish independence. English forces captured the building in 1650. In the midst of the Jacobite Rising in the 1700s, it was used as military barracks. While it's most known for its incredibly rich history and astonishing architecture, it's also infamous for its paranormal ongoings. Visitors have seen many ghostly figures during their castle explorations. One story suggested that a piper was sent to explore the tunnels that lie beneath the great building, but was never seen again. Thereafter, many have documented the song of a lone bagpipe emitting from the tunnels, even though no piper has performed there for centuries. Another otherworldly wanderer is the drummer, who's said to not have a head. He's said to haunt the dungeons where he was kept imprisoned for spying. The sounds of drums have been heard by the guests, and a figure has occasionally been spotted. But it's uncertain if this is the drummer. The legend states that should he be seen again, the castle will once again be under attack. The apparition wanders the halls in search of his lost drumsticks, according to the story. While there have been many attempts to debunk such a story, it remains an intriguing attraction at the castle. Other ghosts include the Grey Lady and the story of the Black Hound. The Grey Lady was accused of witchcraft. Upon her passing, her spirit was said to have traveled back to the place that was once her home, the Edinburgh Castle. She's often seen wandering the hallways. Within the walls of the historical site, there's a small cemetery that was used to bury the pets of the soldiers who inhabited the castle for some time. There have been reports of a white or black spectral hound that's associated with the gravesite. He's either seen or heard around the area and is believed to either be Fido, Topsy, Jip, or Yum Yum. A lesser-seen spectral entity is that of the man in a leather apron. A research investigation was carried out by Dr. Richard Wiseman, who found 240 volunteers who'd not known of the Edinburgh Castle hauntings, and placed them in the castle for 10 days. One reportedly had a burning sensation on their arm, and others felt watched during the course of the project. It was also reported by a few of the volunteers that they'd seen a man in a leather apron. He would appear randomly in the castle vaults, casually walking through the doorway. The Edinburgh Castle is haunted by 6 main souls: the Grey Lady, the unluckiest prisoner, the piper, the drummer, the man in the leather apron, and the ghostly good boy, leading it to be one of the most haunted castles in Scotland. The entrance to Larna Castle is often referred to as the only castle in New Zealand. It's a 25-room Gothic construction, which is a house or a mock castle. It's situated on the ridge of the Otago Peninsula, close to Dunedin. While it may have a magnificent view, it's not entirely a very happy place. The place was built in 1871 by William James Larna, a merchant baron and politician. It took a fair while to complete, and materials from all around the world were used, including marble from Italy, tiles from England, and glass from both France and Venice. In 1885, a ballroom was added, which was the size of 3,000 square feet, a gift from his daughter, Kate, who had just turned 21. It's William himself who's said to haunt the Dream Hole. Many have reported seeing a male figure wandering around the castle. Some have alleged that his remains were disturbed in the family crypt, resulting in the release of his spirit. He's not the only one who's said to be haunting the castle. It's been said that Eliza, the man's wife, haunts the landing close to her bedroom, and the oldest daughter, of course, haunts the ballroom. A New Zealand TV program called Ghost Hunt had filmed an episode in the castle and had even gotten a photograph of who they believed to be William. During a 2-night stay, the team members of Quantum Foundations had conducted EVP sessions, which would yield clear voices that were answering the questions they asked. Contamination by other clients staying there had been ruled out, since the team had sole occupancy. In the early morning hours, one of the investigators had a personal ghostly encounter. She'd felt a presence beside her which had made her jump in fright, and had heard the swishing sounds of a dress. Another had captured male voices on an EVP who was speaking in short sentences from the same location. The ballroom sessions found sounds of dishes being moved around, even though there was no one in there. There appeared to be no logical explanation, and nothing was moved or altered upon investigation. Constance de Bath Brandon had also been a family resident here who passed away due to unknown causes in her late 80s. It was during an EVP in her bedroom that a whisper of "I didn't do it" was captured in response to a question. That was referred to as a Class A capture by the team. The room housed various personal belongings, which included a wedding dress. Upon William's passing, he'd left the house to Constance, but the children had opposed this and ultimately won in court. The family no longer wished to live in the castle thereafter, but they could not sell it either, as no one at the time could afford it. It would later be taken over by the state and stripped bare. In the first decades of the 20th century, it would be used as a psychiatric hospital, a hospital for shell-shocked soldiers, as well as a nunnery. For an unspecified amount of time, Kate's luxurious ballroom was used as a sheep holding pen. In the 1960s, it was bought by the Baker family, who restored and refurbished the castle as a tourist attraction. The stables were turned into guest rooms, and attractions were placed around the building. A statue of a woman with dark hair and blue skin and Victorian-era undergarments hovered below the ceiling. She was meant to be a ghost, which is possibly a selling point that the Bakers came up with, following the reports of hauntings there. During one of the guests' visits, he inquired about the ghosts, and the duty manager confirmed them and stated that there'd been stories of a man's figure being spotted. There'd been strange knockings that evening as well, and one guest had reportedly been shoved by an invisible force 3 separate times. Nupepo, as pictured here, refers to a yokai in Japanese folklore. Yokai are the creatures and phenomena that occur in Japanese tales, including spirits and monsters. Its name comes from the word nuperi, which means a flat-faced or dazed expression, a derogatory slang term that was previously used to describe women who used too much makeup. This creature resembles a large blob with saggy lumps that take the form of limbs. The wrinkles on its face take the appearance of eyes, a nose, and a mouth, and it stands no more than 1.5 meters tall. In addition to being a lumpy blob, this yokai is said to have a pungent odor and stays in dark areas that are secluded, including mountain ridges, temples that have been abandoned, or unpopular streets. The Nupepo seems to find enjoyment in the shock and surprised expression on human faces. In Volume 3 of 180 Hitoyo Hanashi texts, Maki Bokusen recorded an incident in 1609 where a creature resembling this yokai was spotted in the shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu's garden. He'd been so repulsed by it that he ordered it to be taken away and cast out to the mountain areas. He would later come to learn that he'd missed out on a rare opportunity, as it's been alleged that the creature can bestow an unusual amount of strength if a piece of him is consumed. The wobbly blob is a relatively harmless and quite elusive yokai, aside from the aggressive odor that it gives off. Despite its formless appearance, the Nupepo is quick-moving, which makes it especially difficult to chase away. According to another legend of the yokai, consuming a part of it may also grant eternal youth, and can cure any disease or illness, and often provides the solution to any issue. While they are fairly docile creatures, there have been various theories as to where the foul smell and strange appearance comes from, which are rather macabre. Tales have claimed that the cryptid wanders around aimlessly and is a solitary creature, but there have been reports of them being spotted in groups. If encountered, it's unlikely to do any harm at all, but one would find comfort in the shocked and alarmed expression that would paint one's face. Pictured here is the Haw Par Villa in Singapore, the horror movie of amusement parks. It's the polar opposite of the fun, exciting, and children-friendly Disneyland. It's home to thousands of odd statues, each stranger than the last. Legends state that the wax statues that depict the souls of the condemned come to life at night. It's said to be the weirdest tourist attraction in the world, with statues of half crab, half humans, and a feature known distinctly as Hell's Museum. The villa is said to be a journey through Chinese legends, mythology, and folklore. The amusement park can be found on a hill in Pasir Panjang and was the creation of a Myanmar businessman, Aw Boon Haw. He'd made this attraction for his brother, Aw Boon Par. The park was once referred to as the Tiger Balm Gardens, after the Tiger Balm medical ointment that the siblings' father had made. After the 1937 construction, the villa was open to the public and was a clear reflection of Boon Haw's passion for culture and mythology. He'd supervised the artisans who made many of the original fixtures. When the war had begun, the whole family would flee the area and move to Yangon. During this time, the park would be used as an observation point for the Japanese army. Upon their return from the 1940s to the 1970s, various family members would contribute to the development of the attraction, which included the creator's son. Thereafter, it became the home of otherworldly experiences. It's known for its incredibly vivid depictions of the 10 courts of hell from Chinese folklore. Aside from this, there are thousands of statues and 150 dioramas that depict some rather surreal scenes from Chinese literature, which include Madame White Snake, The Eight Immortals, and The Journey to the West. As mentioned, the villa is rife with stories of ghosts. One such story stated that a few mediums had crept in one night and had taken part in trances, but the spirits that were summoned were not sent off, but instead entered a few of the statues. It's also claimed that those statues were later moved to a hidden bunker. Some have reported hearing piercing screams deep in the night and have seen the statues come to life, including the snake found at the entrance. One of the haunting legends connected to this place also stated that the 10 courts of hell would suck the nighttime visitors into the burning depths. 2 of the legends were put to the test by some journalists who spent the night in the park. During the day, the place is terrifying enough and would likely be far worse at night, and that it was. The 2 legends were that of statues coming to life, and the other, the 10 courts that would suck in the evening visitors. 4 individuals had been invited for a walk through the park one evening, and upon their arrival, one of the external camera lights would immediately begin to flicker. The multimedia producer, Isaac Neto, stated that nothing like this had happened before, and he checked the light settings. During the first test, the team would venture into the darkest corners of the park, but the moment they began to set up their tripods, one of the camcorders began to act strangely. The flash had flickered a few times, which would usually require someone to press the button. The team sat in isolation and complete silence, but observed no living statues. What one of them had experienced, though, was an unseen brush across her arm. Once they reviewed the footage, they noticed some glowing arms. During the second test, the camera that had been set up to record stopped recording. This would be the 3rd time that perfectly working equipment would act up. Upon their departure, the team spoke with the security guard, who'd only worked there for a month. He told them that he'd already gotten used to the paranormal encounters. He smiled before stating that after a while, one learns to make friends there, and promptly returns to his post. Aside from being featured in the story, as was so written by Bokusen, this blob can also be found in depictions by Gazu Hiyaki Yagyo, who drew it near a temple surrounded by nira chive, a food that was taboo in the Buddhist cuisine because of the powerful aroma. This may be connected to the tale in which the yokai is also a food delicacy. In December of 1924, the SS Watertown, a United States tanker ship carrying crude oil, left from its New Orleans, Louisiana port, headed for California. Captained by veteran sailor Keith Tracy, the ship and its crew had successfully navigated the journey through the Panama Canal many times. Sadly for 2 of the sailors, this trip would be their first and their last aboard the Watertown, after a tragic accident claimed their lives. It would not, however, be the last time the sailors were seen by the crew. On December 4th, James Courtney and Michael Meehan were assigned to clean one of the empty cargo tanks in the ship's hull. Armed with cleaning supplies, the pair descended the tank's metal ladder and began the routine task of scrubbing the interior of its walls. Without proper ventilation, however, fumes began to fill the enclosed area, quickly overwhelming James and Michael. A short time later, other members of the crew went to check on the sailors when they discovered them unconscious and unresponsive inside of the tank. James was found lying across from Michael, indicating that Michael had succumbed to the fumes first. It's believed that in an attempt to drag Michael to the ladder, James also fell victim to the fumes and fell unconscious a few moments later. The sailors were declared deceased and, as was tradition, given a burial at sea. The following day, however, the ship's first mate reported seeing the two sailors among the waves alongside the ship. Over the next few days, the other crew members, including the captain, reported the same bizarre sightings of James and Michael, stating that the pair were always seen about 40 feet away from the ship, and roughly 10 feet apart. When the ship docked in New Orleans, Captain Tracy reported the two deaths as well as the unusual sightings of the pair to the company that owned the vessel. Unconvinced by the story, the company asked for proof of such a bizarre event. Having nothing, the captain ordered his first mate to purchase a Kodak camera to capture the event should it happen again. Watertown again left its port and headed for California. It wasn't long before the apparitions of the dead sailors were spotted again in the water. This time, however, Captain Tracy was ready and snapped 6 photographs of the mysterious figures. Once the ship completed its delivery and returned once again to New Orleans, he sent the photos to New York to be processed. 5 of the 6 photos appeared to show nothing more than the ocean. However, the 6th photo was different. In the black and white image, 2 men are clearly visible, bobbing amongst the waves near the ship. According to the captain and crew, these mysterious figures floating in the water were identical to the deceased sailors. 10 years after the photograph was originally developed, it was published in a shipping journal called the East Coast Journal. Intrigued by the creepy photo, many set out to discover its origins and to disprove its authenticity. Unfortunately, by the time its existence was made known, both the captain and many of the original crew members of the ship had since passed away. With the original image and negative lost, the only people to witness this bizarre event gone, the mystery of the unexplained photograph may never be solved. Located in Sydney, Australia, Luna Park opened its gates in 1935. Modeled after the popular Coney Island amusement park in New York, Luna Park offered family-friendly activities to its patrons, such as carnival-style games, deep-fried foods, and rides. One of these rides, the Ghost Train, was particularly popular amongst Luna Park visitors. The roller coaster-style attraction carried its passengers through a haunted building and along a track complete with plenty of drops, twists, and turns to entice thrill seekers of all ages. On the evening of June 9, 1971, disaster struck when the Ghost Train amusement ride caught fire, killing 7 people. Among the victims were John Godson and his 2 young sons, Craig and Damien. The Godson family were on the last day of a planned family vacation when they decided to visit Luna Park. As the evening began to come to a close and their tickets dwindled, Craig and Damien decided they wanted to ride the Ghost Train one more time before leaving. With their father in tow, the family boarded the train, while Jenny, the children's mother, stayed behind to get some ice cream. Screams were not an uncommon sound heard from the ride, so when shrieks were heard coming from within the attraction's haunted building, they were initially ignored. It wasn't until smoke and flames began to billow from the building that employees realized there was something very wrong. Sadly, when Jenny returned, she learned that her husband and 2 children were amongst the 7 people who had tragically perished in the fire. Jenny Godson would later develop a film role from the family's vacation. Among these photos is the last photo ever taken of Damien Godson. In the photo, Damien can be seen standing next to a man dressed in a bizarre costume. According to Jenny, the photo was taken just prior to the accident when the man had silently approached the family before placing his hand on Damien's shoulder. Believing the man was simply an actor, Jenny snapped the photo. It was later learned, however, that there were no actors in employment at the park that day. Some believe he was nothing more than a street performer. Others compare the unusual man's appearance to that of Malak, a deity associated in biblical sources with child sacrifice. Whatever the case may be, both the cause of the fire and the identity of the mysterious horned man remain unknown. On July 26, 1974, a 12-year-old girl in Provincetown, Massachusetts, was out walking the family dog at the Race Point Dunes when she made a startling discovery. Just yards from the road, the decomposed remains of a woman lay on an oversized beach blanket. Authorities were immediately alerted to the discovery, and after a brief investigation, the case was ruled a homicide. The woman was found lying face down on the undisturbed beach blanket, missing several teeth, both hands, and a forearm. One side of her skull had been crushed. Her ultimate cause of death was listed as blunt force trauma to the head. The woman had long auburn hair that was pulled back in a ponytail. She was approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed about 145 pounds. Found underneath the woman's body was a pair of Wrangler jeans and a blue bandana. The woman, however, had no identification on her person. The inability to ID the woman resulted in her becoming a Jane Doe, known as the Lady of the Dunes. Over the years, the woman's body was exhumed several times for DNA comparisons. However, these attempts to identify her have proven unsuccessful. In 2015, a new theory caught the public's eye when Joe Hill, son of horror author Stephen King, informed police that the unknown woman may have appeared as an extra in the movie Jaws. During a scene in the movie depicting the 4th of July beach party, a woman bearing a striking resemblance to the Lady of the Dunes, dressed in Wrangler jeans and a blue bandana, similar to those found on the unidentified woman's body, can be seen standing amongst the other extras on the beach. While this theory has never been proven, both the Lady of the Dunes as well as the woman in the photograph from the movie remain unidentified. On November 23, 1944, soldiers stationed at a US Allied base in Kortenberg, Belgium, were caught off guard when an American B-17 bomber plane began to descend over the base. With no reports of a scheduled landing from such a plane, the airbase crew watched with bated breath as the 35,000-pound war machine clumsily rocketed towards them with its landing gear down. The plane clumsily touched down, hitting one wing on the ground, destroying one of the plane's engines before touching down, approximately 100 feet from the anti-gunner's position at the airbase. Soldiers watched for nearly 20 minutes, expecting the crew to disembark from the disabled aircraft and explain the situation any minute. However, when no one emerged, Army Major John Crisp decided to investigate. He and several airmen carefully approached the bomber, cautious of who might be aboard. However, when they opened the plane's door, they were astounded to find nobody inside. Evidence such as food wrappers and a flight log found in the cockpit indicated that someone had recently been inside. However, all of the parachutes appeared to still be in place. The bizarre report was passed through the chain of command, who in turn investigated the unexplainable incident. Using the airplane's tail number, the names of the pilot and crew of the bomber were quickly learned. All 10 crew members and the pilot were found safe and sound stationed at a base in Belgium. According to them, they had been part of a squadron of B-17s that were carrying out bombing missions in eastern Germany when the plane suddenly experienced a malfunction. Unable to maintain a proper altitude, the pilot ordered the crew to toss any unnecessary weight from the plane. However, as their rapid descent continued, one of the airplane's engines took a direct hit from an anti-aircraft gun. Left with no other option, the pilot engaged the plane's autopilot and ordered the crew to bail near Brussels, Belgium. How the plane was able to navigate its way all the way to an Allied base and safely land with no crew aboard remains unknown. The John Lawson House, located in New Hamburg, New York, is one of the oldest structures in town. Built by John Lawson sometime in the 1840s, the Victorian-style home is beautifully designed with arched windows, corbelled chimneys, and intricate bracketed cornice. However, aside from the beautiful architecture, the house is also known for something else, and that something is mannequins. On any given day, a trio of female mannequins could be found placed in various positions around the property's front porch. Life-sized, the mannequins sported clothing, wigs, and a vast array of accessories that were constantly changing. People have reported seeing them holding things like towels, bird cages, books, and tools. Their vintage wigs and outfits change daily as well, depending on the time of year. This in itself is bizarre enough. However, what makes these mannequins extra creepy is the fact that no one knows where they came from, why they were there, or who changed their clothing. Locals claimed that when inclement weather occurred, the mannequins disappeared, yet no one has ever been seen moving them. According to the neighbors, on certain nights, a faint glow can be seen coming from one of the house's curtained windows. But other than that, there were never any signs of life at the home. Some believe the mannequins could have been a nod to several tragic events that occurred in the town. In 1871, a 25-car freight train derailed and was struck by an oncoming train, killing 22 people aboard. Then, 6 years later, a massive fire raged through the town, burning the majority of the structures to the ground. The John Lawson House, however, was left untouched by the flames, as was the home directly across the street. The mannequins could often be found looking in the direction of the crash site, less than 200 feet from the home, or towards the abandoned home across the road. The mannequins made their debut in the early 2000s and continued to appear until 2016. That year, the home was sold and the mannequins simply vanished, leaving locals with more questions than answers. Over the years, many people have tried to solve the mystery, but to no avail. Records indicate the home was sold twice during the years the mannequins were active. However, from all accounts, the home remained vacant during this time. Whatever the case may be, the person responsible has never come forward, and the mystery of the moving mannequins remains unsolved. Tsunamis are some of the most destructive forces of nature, as they're known to destroy anything in their path in a matter of mere seconds. In many cases where tsunamis hit built-up areas, buildings have been destroyed, vehicles have been carried off as if they're nothing more than tinder, and roads have been left virtually unrecognizable. A magnitude 9.0 tsunami that hit Japan in March of 2011 proved no different when it caused widespread destruction after an earthquake occurred about 90 miles from the coast and around 19 miles beneath the sea floor. The tsunami had some unexpected consequences, as the Fukushima nuclear power plant's backup generators were damaged by the force of the tsunami waves, resulting in one of the worst nuclear disasters on record to date. This image of a ship at sea may seem normal, but quite unbelievably, it's also the result of that very same tsunami, though to most people it seems almost tranquil, as if a smokestack ship is quietly making its way across the ocean towards its intended destination. But the reality of this photo is far more unnerving, when it's revealed that this ship, the Ryo Unmaru, was moored at Hokkaido in Japan when the tsunami struck, dislodging it and sending it floating aimlessly out to sea with a further 1.5 million tons of debris from the shore. Luckily, no one was aboard the ship at the time, as it was slated to be sent for scrapping by its owner, who, when contacted after the ship was located, stated that he didn't want it back, leaving authorities with a difficult decision to make as to what was to become of the vessel, which had now become known as the Tsunami Ghost Ship. At first, it was thought that the best course of action would be to destroy the ship, as it was found to contain no cargo, but it was carrying 2,300 gallons of diesel fuel, which may have been a threat to marine life if it were to leak into the water. This prompted the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the EPA to carry out a threat assessment of the situation, and it was found that it would be better for the ship to be destroyed and for the diesel to be allowed to evaporate naturally. And so the US Coast Guard readied itself for the destruction of the ship, and one of its vessels, the Anacapa, made its way to the area after the ship had been aimlessly drifting across the Pacific Ocean for more than a year after the tsunami struck. But their plans were interrupted when they were informed that the Bernice C, a 62-foot Canadian fishing vessel, had claimed salvage rights over the Ryo Unmaru, and the operation was immediately halted. The captain of the Bernice C and his crew assessed the condition of the ship and found that it would be unsafe to tow it away from the area, deciding instead that the Coast Guard should go ahead with their plans to destroy it, since it was drifting towards a busy shipping lane and could have posed a serious threat if it ended up in the path of a passing ship. The Coast Guard saw this as a good opportunity for crew members aboard the Anacapa to carry out a live fire exercise, and on the 5th of April 2012, they opened fire on the unmanned vessel, with more than 100 rounds being fired. While the operation was ongoing, a C-130 Hercules plane kept watch from the skies above, warning any approaching ships in the area to stay clear for their own safety, and those of their passengers. After the ship was fired upon and filled with holes, the Anacapa's crew proceeded to use hoses to fill the ship with water, putting out any fires that resulted from the operation, and speeding up the rate at which it was sinking. When the operation was completed, the Ryo Unmaru disappeared beneath the waters of the Gulf of Alaska, and all that remained was a large column of smoke that trailed away over the ocean. As for the rest of the debris that was washed out into the ocean by the tsunami, it started washing up onto the shores of the western United States in 2012, much earlier than was predicted by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. This image of a bell depicts an image very similar to those of other bells found on shipwrecks. But this bell was once aboard a ship called the Whydah Galley, which has an interesting and somewhat sordid history. Even after it eventually sank, the ship became the stuff of legends, as it was rumored to be carrying a massive haul of treasure. But no one knew exactly where it sank, and speculation began to run rife. The 100-foot-long Whydah Galley was originally intended to be used as a slave ship when it was constructed in 1715. But this was thankfully never to be, as it never made it to its intended destination during its maiden voyage. Soon after setting out from Jamaica, the ship was set upon by a pirate known as Samuel Bellamy, also known as Black Sam, whose crew took control of the vessel and put it to good use, pirating several other ships as they made their way to Wellfleet, Massachusetts. The ship was now rumored to be loaded with the treasures that were plundered from other ships, and upon making landfall, the crew and captain would share in the spoils, making them very rich men indeed. But that's when tragedy struck. On the 26th of April in 1717, the ship had hailed within visual distance of the shore and was likely getting ready to approach. But the crew had been drinking heavily and found themselves struggling to steer the vessel against the strong winds that were reaching up to 70 miles per hour. This resulted in swells as high as 30 feet that battered the side of the ship, further hampering any efforts to take it back under control. The ship would finally strike a sandbank, causing it to rupture and sink beneath the violent waters. As soon as news of the wreck began to spread, it became clear that the treasure was up for grabs to whoever dared to enter the water, and many people started making their way to the area in hopes that they could collect their share. Colonial Governor Samuel Shute ordered a cartographer and colonial naval commander by the name of Cyprian Southack to locate the ship's wreckage and to collect as much of the sunken treasure as he could, so that it could be taken back to England. Upon reaching the area, Southack reported that as many as 200 people had gathered over a 20-mile stretch of the shore to collect as much of the treasure that had washed ashore as possible, after the ship had flipped over in the water and he was only able to collect a small amount of valuables. Not everyone was convinced that the ship really contained anything of value, but one of the crew members stated that 180 bags of gold and silver, 20 tons of ivory, and a large amount of jewels had been taken from other ships and were still aboard the Whydah galley, after it had been divided up equally amongst its pirate crew. But the ship itself was lost beneath the water, and for the next 250 years or so, many treasure hunters searched for it and speculated where it could be located, but without any success. That's until 1984, when a treasure hunter named Barry Clifford believed that he had finally found the ship's wreckage off the coast of Cape Cod. Clifford had heard about the sunken treasure when he was a child growing up in Cape Cod, and had always dreamed of finding it one day. Upon locating the wreck of the ship, he was still uncertain that it was the Whydah galley, but he and his crew soon started finding coins and gold that dated to the correct time period, and he started to believe that he'd finally found what he was looking for. But his suspicions were only confirmed when the ship's bell was found, and upon closer inspection, they noticed an inscription that read "The Whydah Galley, 1716," confirming that they had indeed solved the mystery of the ship's location, and that it wasn't a mere legend. Along with the gold and silver that was found, Clifford's crew also salvaged thousands of other artifacts from the wreckage, many of which were now housed at the Expedition Whydah Sea Lab and Learning Center in Provincetown, Massachusetts. They were also fortunate enough to find more than 20 cannons that were taken by Bellamy from plundered ships during his reign of terror on the open sea, and it's expected that more artifacts will be uncovered, as more treasures are found with each expedition to the wreckage. To this day, the Whydah Galley remains the only authenticated pirate shipwreck that's ever been recovered, and its legend is set to live on for many years to come. Any fan of the author Mark Twain will be familiar with his most famous character, Tom Sawyer, a boy who loves nothing more than spending time outside rather than attending his classes at school. They'll also remember that Tom and his companions often visited a swimming hole where they kept the sweltering Missouri heat at bay. And while many of us may have done the same thing when we were younger, it's an activity that's frowned upon today, since it's considered to be too dangerous. But one swimming hole seems to have a worse reputation than most, as it seems quite harmless at the surface, as is evidenced in this image, but it hides a terrifying secret beneath the water. The Jacob's Well Spring is now known as one of the most dangerous diving sites in the world, but this hasn't stopped people from flocking to its cool waters during the hotter days of summer in Texas. There are those who are more cautious though, and they vowed never to set foot in the well's water, since it's claimed the lives of at least 8 divers who have attempted to explore the cave system that lies beneath. Attempts were then made in 1980 to discourage divers from exploring the caves, as a rebar grate was affixed to the entrance, further bolstered by quickset concrete. But quite unbelievably, it did little to deter divers who were determined to make it into the depths of the caves. Just 6 months after these modifications were made, the grate was found to have been removed by divers who had the forethought to carry tools with them as they made their way to the cave's entrance. These divers went as far as to leave a note next to the dismantled grate that read, "You can't keep us out," and it became clear that very little could be done to keep people from risking their lives in search of a thrill. Many divers have ventured into the cave system's first chamber, which is the least dangerous, since it reaches 30 feet straight down before angling away for a further 55 feet, making it relatively easy to navigate and to return to the surface. But this is where the caves become much more dangerous, and the fact that the second chamber is referred to as a funnel should be enough to discourage anyone from venturing inside, but this simply isn't the case. The funnel stretches around 80 feet into the distance before ending in an area with restricted access that leads to the third chamber. But what makes it even more terrifying is the fact that it contains a false chimney, which has been mistaken by many divers as a way to the surface. only to find out that they were very wrong and at least one diver has become trapped in this area. This would be enough to keep most divers out of the cave system, but many have ventured beyond this point to the terrifying third chamber, which contains silt and unsteady gravel that poses a serious threat to any diver. If a diver were to make it this far, they would need to make use of inflatable water wings, as they need to avoid stirring up any dust or silt that can seriously hamper their vision and navigation. Two of the most important aspects of diving. Only a few divers have ventured beyond this point, as those who dare to attempt entry into the fourth chamber first have to do something that may seem like pure insanity to the casual observer, which is the removal of their oxygen tanks. This needs to be done because the entrance is too narrow for a diver to swim through while the tanks are strapped to their back. Those who have made it inside and back to the surface have stated that the chamber is free of silt and filled with beautiful limestone formations. On one occasion, a 21-year-old diver named Diego Adame decided to explore the caves but soon found that he was running out of oxygen after losing one of his flippers, and he realized that he only had a slim chance of making it out in time. He then decided that his only option was to use his blade to cut himself free of his weight belt, and thankfully he was able to make it back to dry land in the nick of time, but he later described his experience as death-defying. Jacob's Well is infamous for the dangers that it holds, but despite this, many people still decide to swim and dive there, ignoring the warning signs that encourage them not to. When discussing Western movies, one of the most iconic films that's usually mentioned is Tombstone, which contains some of the greatest characters from Days Gone. In reality, the town of Tombstone, which is located in Arizona, is rumored to be one of the most haunted places in the Old West, and it's thought that many of the spirits that dwell there are those of people who lost their lives to outlaws, disease, and general lawlessness. One of its most haunted attractions is the Birdcage Theater, which back in the day served not only as a theater but as a saloon, gambling area, and brothel. It's said that as many as 26 people lost their lives in the theater for various reasons, and many visitors have reported seeing the spirits of the deceased still roaming around the building. Some claim to have heard disembodied laughter, smelled phantom cigarette smoke, and even heard the sound of a piano playing in the same way that it would have been done in the days of the Old West. Apparitions have been seen in the area that are described as wearing clothing dating back to the 1800s, confirming in many people's minds that these are indeed the ghosts of people who lived in the area during that time. There are also rumors that Fremont Street, which is located close to the OK Corral, is haunted thanks to a battle that was fought between Virgil, Wyatt, and Morgan Earp, along with Doc Holliday, against a set of outlaws that was made up of Billy Claiborne, Wes Fuller, Ike and Billy Clanton, as well as the McLaury brothers Frank and Tom. Many people have reported seeing the spirit of a man named James Burnett, who was also known as Justice Jim, thanks to his position of Justice of the Peace in Pierce, Arizona, walking in the area of the OK Corral. They believe it to be Jim's ghost since he lost his life there during a shootout. Schieffelin Hall served as a theater and opera house back in the day, and it's yet another tombstone building that's said to contain the spirits of people who perished there. Some people have reported hearing the sound of chains being dragged across the building's floor, while others claim to have seen a specter, believed to be that of an actress who performed in the building at one point. Much of the eerie activity that's been noticed in the building seems to be concentrated backstage, further bolstering the theory that many of these spirits belong to the actors and actresses who once performed there. There is, however, very little evidence that these hauntings are true, but this can't be said for another site in Tombstone that's said to contain spirits, namely the Boot Hill Cemetery, where this photo was taken in 1996. The image seems innocent enough, as it shows a man dressed up like a cowboy, posing for the camera while brandishing a firearm. He's looking directly at the camera with a sullen expression on his face, but it's what can be seen behind him that has left many people baffled and terrified to visit the area. A short distance away in the background, the image of another man can be seen, but strangely only the top part of his body is visible, leading many people to believe that this is a ghost that was caught on camera, as it appeared behind the man in the foreground. The photo was taken by Ike Clanton, who has repeatedly stated that there was no one else in the area when he took the photo of one of his friends. No one noticed the strange figure in the background until Ike's friend took a closer look at it about 2 weeks later, and he immediately called Ike to explain what he had found. The man in the background looks like he's wearing a flat-brimmed hat with a light-colored shirt, but Ike insists that he wasn't visible at the time the photo was taken. Ike noticed that the apparition seemed to be looking in the direction of Clanton and the McLaury brothers' graves, and many people believe that he may have been someone who was involved in the shootout that took place at Fremont Street. While many people believe the photo to have been manipulated, it's been scrutinized by many experts over the years and none have been able to find any evidence that it was tampered with. Others think that it isn't actually a spirit, but a mannequin that was placed there intentionally, though this hasn't been proven either, and it's generally accepted in the area that this is the apparition of a long-forgotten cowboy who still walks around the cemetery, even during the day. There have been many instances where people unwittingly capture what they believe to be a ghost on camera. And strangely, many of these happened while a picture was being taken of someone sitting in some form of transport. One such example comes from a photo taken in England in 1959 by a woman named Mabel Chenery. At the time, Mabel's husband was sitting in the driver's seat of his car when she decided to snap a picture of him. But when the film was developed and she took a closer look, she was shocked to see the image of her mother sitting in the back seat. What makes the image even creepier is the fact that the couple had just visited Mabel's mother's grave, and she believes that her mother may have wanted to go on one last car journey in the seat that she used to sit in while she was alive. The photo was analyzed by an expert who at first thought it may merely be a reflection in the car's window, or that it may be a case of double exposure. But he soon stated that he would stake his reputation that the photo wasn't faked in any way. There is always the possibility that the photo was merely a hoax, or that the ghostly figure was indeed caused by some sort of reflection. But none of these theories have been proven, and many people have accepted that it does in fact show a spirit sitting in the car's back seat. In 2018, a 15-year-old boy named Troy Vance decided to grab his camera when he noticed a particularly beautiful sunrise, and while doing so, he decided to include a truck in the picture since he liked the way it looked against the sunrise. He then uploaded the photo to Facebook, but was surprised when some of his friends started commenting that there was something ominous hiding in the photo, and he decided to take a closer look. As he zoomed in, he saw what everyone was talking about, the ghostly apparition of a young boy sitting inside the truck. Troy confirmed that there was no one in the truck at the moment that he took the photo, and is convinced that he managed to capture a spirit on camera. But one of the more convincing instances of a spirit being photographed inside a vehicle is this image that was taken in 1987 by a woman known as Mrs. Sayer while she was visiting the Fleet Air Arm Museum at the Royal Navy Air Station in England. At one point during this visit, Mrs. Sayer decided to have her photo taken in the cockpit of a helicopter that was being used during the Falkland War, but was then obviously no longer in any condition to be flown. She climbed aboard on her own and asked a friend to take the photo, but when the film was developed, she inspected it closely and realized there was someone in the cockpit with her, though this should have been impossible since she was certain that the helicopter was empty at the time. At first, she thought that it may be a case of double exposure, but the more she looked at the photo, the more convinced she became that it was the image of a man sitting next to her, rather than her own. Many people who have inspected the photo state that they can see a man wearing a white-collared shirt, and what's taken most people by surprise is the remarkable clarity of the alleged apparition. The man also seems to be looking over at Mrs. Sayer, or possibly at the person taking the photo, leading many people to believe that the spirit was fully aware that a photo was being taken, suggesting a slight mischievous personality. What makes the photo even stranger is the fact that there have been no reported hauntings at the Fleet Air Arm Museum, and that the helicopter was never flown by anyone who lost their lives while at the helm. There have been suggestions that the spirit belonged to a pilot who passed away long after the war ended, and that he likes to visit the museum from time to time. But not everyone is convinced, and many skeptics have pointed out that there's no definitive way to prove that the image isn't actually a reflection, or that there wasn't someone sitting next to Mrs. Sayer when the photo was taken. To those who believe, though, it's a ghostly mystery that continues to baffle the mind 36 years later. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.